They ridiculed him on live TV, and the man responded by filing a lawsuit that exposed a shocking truth to the world behind the scenes. The night would go on in the usual pattern for millions of viewers who have been tuning in to their late-night comedy. The familiar theme song played on. The host stepped onto his stage with all his swaggering, and cheers erupted from the crowd. It was business as usual, sharp political jabs, cultural commentary, and a sprinkle of self-deprecating humor. But as the night wore on, something felt different. About halfway through the show, the host leaned against his desk, smirking at the camera, and said, "Let's talk about the quiet Trump." A photo of 18-year-old Barron Trump flashed onto the screen. The audience chuckled, unsure of where this was going. The host started with light banter, making jokes about Barron's height and his aloof demeanor. But within moments, the tone shifted. The jokes became personal, dissecting his appearance, mannerisms, and private life. The crowd's laughter wavered, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. For a brief second, even the host hesitated as if realizing he might be crossing a line. But instead of pulling back, he doubled down. The punchline landed harshly, with gasps instead of laughter. Back home in Florida, Barron was scrolling through his phone when clips of the segment started popping up on social media. He couldn't believe it at first. Watching it again, he felt a lump form in his throat. The laughter, the cruel commentary, it all felt like a spotlight shining directly on his most vulnerable insecurities. It wasn't just teasing. It felt calculated, mean-spirited. The reaction online was swift. Hashtags like #TooFar and #HatchDefendBarron began trending, with critics and supporters of the show clashing in heated debates. Some defended the segment as just comedy, while others condemned it as outright bullying. Media outlets picked up the story within hours, replaying the clip repeatedly as commentators weighed in. For Barron, who had spent most of his life out of the public eye, this was uncharted territory. He grew up watching his family navigate scandals and controversies, but was always the quiet one, the one who stayed in the background. Now, the spotlight was on him, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. His family was quick to rally around him. Melania Trump, who was known to be very protective of her son, spoke out first. "My son is not a public figure," she said in a statement. "Children should be off limits, no matter who their parents are." The comment was welcomed by supporters and even some critics, but did little to dampen the firestorm that had been building. Barron spent the next few days avoiding the news, hoping attention would die out. But it didn't. The clip just kept going on, the laughter haunting him at every replay. He began to think that this might be just the way it was. Maybe being ridiculed was an unavoidable consequence of a family name like his. However, something felt off about it. This was no quick joke, but a calculated joke at the cost of an 18-year-old who had no reason to put up with scrutiny. The more Barron watched it, though, the more he knew he could not let it sit. He ran the segment for the final time, viewing all the smirks and the words, before turning off his phone and sitting in silence. The thought weighed heavy on him. If I don't stand up for myself, who will? But standing up meant stepping into a world he'd avoided for years, a world of scrutiny, controversy, and relentless judgment. Was he ready for what was to come? Barron's mind was a whirlwind. For days, he tried to avoid the constant chatter. Headlines dissecting jokes, social media posts running amok as everyone debated his response, even unsolicited advice from strangers. Still, he didn't say a word. It wasn't that he didn't have things to say. He just didn't know anyone would actually care enough to listen. Inside the Trump family mansion in Palm Beach, the tension was abnormal. Discussions swirled among advisors and legal experts, each with his or her opinion on how to handle the situation. Some believed ignoring the controversy was the best strategy, while others argued for a public rebuttal. "This will pass, Barron," an older family friend said over coffee one morning. "These things always do. Don't give it more attention." But Barron wasn't convinced. Sitting at the edge of the family's sprawling terrace, overlooking the ocean, he replayed the events in his mind. The laughter from the audience felt louder with every memory, echoing like a taunt. It wasn't just about the embarrassment. He'd grown up learning to handle whispers and stares. This felt deeper, more malicious. The turning point came during a quiet moment with his mother, Melania. Always poised and measured, She had been his unwavering pillar throughout the ordeal. She found him alone in the study, staring blankly at his laptop. Without saying a word, she placed her hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to fight this battle," she said softly, "but if you choose to, you won't fight it alone." Her words lingered in Baron's mind. He felt the weight of his own decision for the first time. This was not about defending himself, but setting a precedent. If he let this slide, it would send a message that public figures, even those as young as him, were fair game for ridicule. And what about others who faced bullying without the platform to speak out? That night, after hours of reflection, Baron went into the dining room where his father's longtime attorney was sitting. The man had a commanding presence. He had slicked back silver hair and a briefcase placed neatly at his side. He looked up as Baron entered, raising an eyebrow in curiosity. "I have decided," Baron said, his voice steady but heavy with what he said. "I want to file a lawsuit." The attorney leaned back in his chair, studying the young man sitting in front of him. "You understand what this means, don't you? This won't just be about the jokes. The media will pick you apart. They'll dig into your life, your history, everything. Are you ready for that?" "I've thought about it," Baron replied, meeting his gaze. "And I know it won't be easy, but this isn't about me. It's about showing people that there is a line, and crossing it has consequences." The attorney nodded, a faint smile breaking his otherwise stoic expression. "All right," he said, "then let's make them understand." The lawsuit was filed within days, and news of Baron's decision spread like wildfire. Media outlets jumped on the story, dissecting every aspect of the case and speculating about the outcome. The lawsuit was not just a legal battle. It was a cultural flashpoint. Some hailed Baron as a symbol of standing up to bullying, while others dismissed him as overly sensitive, accusing the Trump family of weaponizing the courts. But for Baron, the opinions didn't matter anymore. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. But as the lawsuit gained traction, the question loomed. Would this fight bring the justice Baron sought, or would it only deepen the spotlight he'd worked so hard to avoid? The news of Baron Trump filing a lawsuit against the network landed like a bombshell. Within hours, it became the top story on every major news outlet. The headlines were anything but lukewarm. From supportive to scathing, such as "Baron Trump fights back," "a bold stand or a fragile ego," and "late-night comedy under fire." When is it too far? Social media became a war zone, with hashtags #StandWithBaron and #satire fighting for dominance. The public's response was split down the middle. On one side, people praised Baron for standing up for himself in a lawsuit, seen as a much-needed step toward holding powerful media figures accountable. "This isn't about politics," one viral tweet read. "It's about basic decency. Leave kids out of it." Others were over the top, saying that the Trump family was milking the situation for attention. "Comedy is comedy," a prominent pundit insisted on cable news. "If we start censoring jokes, where does it end?" The network itself attempted at first to defuse the situation. A spokesman issued a statement, so polished it might have been vetted by a presidential speechwriter. He professed the network's dedication to free speech and to humor while sounding appropriately regretful of offense. Damage control aside, though, it was insufficient. Critics felt that an apology stopped just short of the real issue. Targeting an 18-year-old who had actively tried not to bring attention to himself, the host said nothing. But this irreverent and unapologetic humor showman was now at the center of the tempest. Guessing about his reaction ensued along with claims that he and his network executives were in heated argument. When he finally spoke up during a recent episode of the show, his tone was far from conciliatory. "I make jokes," he said, leaning into the camera with his signature smirk. "Some people can take them and some people can't." The audience laughed, but the moment felt uncomfortable, even forced. Online, the clip was dissected endlessly, with many calling it a non-apology. As the lawsuit picked steam, the storyline started to find a life in itself. All legal analysts presented their arguments either for or against Baron's merits. Some think that satire belongs to the constitutionally protected purview of freedom of speech through the First Amendment. The lawsuit against Baron would definitely fail. But others point at the leaked producers' emails containing a clear scheme to provoke on the show's part to change the rules of the game. During this time of turmoil, however, Barron generally stayed out of view. He did not consent to interviews. He let the public narrative ride through his attorneys, but pressure was mounting upon him. Once frequent callers during a friendly check-in now became aloof, as they did not know how to relate to their now notorious friend. At least, strangers now stopped him in the street. Some said supportive words, while others hurled derogatory insults at him. He refused to cave in. "This isn't about winning or losing," he confided to his lawyer in a late-night meeting. "It's about making sure people know this kind of behavior isn't okay." The network wasn't about to fold easily. Their lawyers went on the offensive, framing the lawsuit as a threat to free speech. They portrayed Barron as overly sensitive, unable to withstand the playful jabbing inherent with being in the public eye due to who he was, related to such an iconic individual. However, evidence released by email accounts from show producers, shown when the trial first began, suggested otherwise. "Make it sting," and "push the envelope" were used and painted the intention as one of malice, and the general population began to shift. Even some of the show's most loyal fans found themselves questioning the ethics of targeting a teenager. But as the lines between comedy, cruelty, and accountability blurred, the world waited to see whether the courtroom would deliver justice or merely more spectacle. While the world speculated on the lawsuit's outcome, Barron's legal team worked tirelessly behind closed doors. The office of his lead attorney became a war room. Walls were lined with documents, timelines, and charts mapping out every angle of the case. It wasn't just winning. It was about building an airtight argument that would stand up to the network's powerful defense team. Emails from the show's producers constituted a goldmine of evidence. What initially seemed like a few careless remarks revealed something much darker. On closer reading, the tenor of the emails was brazenly confrontational, using language such as, "He's an easy target," and "let's push the line and see what happens." One of the emails even suggested how the fallout could help ratings, calling the controversy a PR win waiting to happen. When Barron's lawyers showed him these emails, the young man's face darkened. "They didn't just make a mistake," he said. "They planned this. They knew exactly what they were doing." The legal team decided to file a motion to include the emails as key evidence in the trial. The network's lawyers immediately moved to block their admission, arguing that the emails were taken out of context and did not represent the intent of the segment. But the judge ruled in Barron's favor by allowing the emails to become part of the case. The judgment sent shock waves through the entertainment world. The news of the emails leaked into the press and ignited a fresh wave of indignation. Public opinion began to drift further in favor of Barron. Even those people who had begun by dismissing the lawsuit as a frivolous waste of time found it impossible to defend the producer's action. Public and advertiser pressure were mounting against the network. Brands began pulling their sponsorships off the show because they did not want to be associated with this controversy. Chaos reigned inside the network. Producers and executives held emergency meetings, trying to contain the fallout. Fingers were pointed, blame was deflected, and morale plummeted. The once untouchable host of the show became a liability. Despite his defiant public persona, insiders revealed that he was increasingly isolated, both professionally and personally. The host finally addressed the controversy during an episode of his show, but the response fell flat. His tone was defensive, his jokes forced. "We live in strange times," he said, gesturing toward the camera. "When comedians are put on trial for doing their job." The crowd laughed, but it felt hollow, a pale echo of the raucous energy that once commanded the room. Meanwhile, Barron remained fixated. He was consumed by depositions, strategy meetings, and media updates. The weight of the case started to tell, however. Long hours alone were spent late at night, wrestling with the enormity of what he had set in motion. He often scrolled through messages from strangers, some supportive, others vitriolic. One message, however, stood out. It was from a mother in Kansas who thanked him for his courage. Her teenage son had been relentlessly bullied at school and saw Barron's fight as a beacon of hope. "You're showing him that he doesn't have to stay silent," the message read. Barron saved it, returning to it whenever doubt crept in. Despite the mounting stress, Barron refused to waver. For Barron, the case had become a symbolic cause, standing for a more important fight against the culture of shocking people instead of showing respect to human decency. But now, with the looming date of the trial, stakes would be raised. The question looming in the air was, could Barron's evidence be strong enough to bring responsibility to the network, or would the network influence weigh in his favor and bring him to the ground? The day of the trial was unlike anything Barron had ever experienced. Crowds of reporters and spectators lined the courthouse steps in Miami, microphones and cameras trained on every door. The buzzing energy was almost suffocating, and Barron felt it with every step as he walked into the building alongside his legal team, dressed in a tailored navy suit. He attempted to emulate the serene composure his father was known for, but his clenched fists told another story. The courtroom inside was a drama of tension. All seats were occupied, legal analysts, journalists, supporters, and skeptics, each looking forward to witnessing the battle. Barron sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, staring at the polished wood of the desk in front of him. Across the room, the network's high-powered legal team seemed at ease, whispering casually as if this were just another day in court. The host, noticeably absent, was a point of contention in the media almost immediately. The opening argument set the tone. The network's lawyers framed the case as an attack on free speech, describing their client as a comedian exercising his constitutional rights. Satire has always been a cornerstone of our democracy, the lawyer leading the challenge declared, his voice echoing off the walls of the courtroom. To curtail it is to risk losing one of our most potent weapons for ensuring that those with the greatest power are held accountable. But Barron's lawyers were right on cue. This isn't satire, his lawyer asserted flatly. This is about a calculated decision to target a young man who had done nothing to invite such ridicule. It's about intent, and the evidence will show that this was not a harmless joke. It was a deliberate act designed to humiliate. The tension in the room was palpable as the trial progressed. The highlight of the trial came with the presentation of infamous emails from the producers as part of the evidence. For all to see on a large screen, the words were projected. "Push the line and let's make it sting." Gasps ran through the courtroom. But the neutrality with which the jurors had been listening all turned into uneasiness. The defense moved quickly to play down the emails, claiming that some phrases were taken out of context. The nature of comedy is to provoke, their lawyer insisted. These discussions were part of the creative process, not an attack plan, but the prosecution's next witness drove the point home. A former producer for the show, who had left under murky circumstances, was called to testify. She was nervous, fidgeting with her hands as she took the stand, but her voice grew steadier as she recounted her experience. "We knew it was reckless," she said. "There was a question over targeting Barron Trump, because really, he is not a public figure. He's the child of a former president, and those questions were overruled. The commanders wanted something to go viral. That was it." Her words struck like lightning. Even the defense lawyers looked taken aback. The court erupted into murmurings and whispers as people digested the implications. It was not poor judgment. It was even a premeditated choice, based on ratings and shock value. Barron's time came when he was called to testify. The courtroom became silent as he walked to the witness stand, such that his tall figure seemed even more towering in the weight of the moment. He took a deep breath, hands gripping the edges of the stand. The questions were direct. "Why did you decide to file this lawsuit?" the prosecutor asked. Barron hesitated, his voice steady but filled with emotion when he finally spoke. "Because this isn't just about me. It's about drawing a line. If someone like me, someone with resources, a family that supports me, can be treated like this, what does that mean for everyone else? For kids in school or people without a voice? This isn't about jokes. It's about basic respect." His words hung in the air, resonating deeply with the jury and the audience. The lawyers for the network, too, did not quite know how to react. The drama continued with the trial as if it were a very complicated television drama. The defense called their witnesses, their industry people who explained that satire is essential in comedy, but the damage was done. The emails, the producer's testimony, and Barron's heart-wrenching words were already etched in the minds of all the people inside the courtroom. But with closing arguments soon to come, the final question remained. Would the jury side with Barron's fight for accountability, or would the network's defense of free speech prevail? The jury deliberation felt like an eternity, each minute stretched, the tension inside and outside the courtroom mounting. Barron sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, trying to stay composed, though his foot tapped restlessly beneath the desk. His mother, sitting behind him, reached forward and touched his shoulder reassuringly. It was a small gesture, but it reminded him that he wasn't alone in this. Finally, nearly 7 hours later, the jury filed back into the courtroom. The atmosphere was electric, every movement amplified in the silence. The foreperson stood up, grasping the piece of paper that would determine the verdict of one of the most sensationalized trials in recent history. "We find in favor of the plaintiff," she said, her voice steady and firm. A room full of emotions erupted. Barron let out a breath he had not known he was holding. His lawyers looked at each other with slight nods, their hard work and meticulous strategy now paying off. And behind him, his mother gently squeezed his shoulder. The legal team representing the network sat in stunned silence. The confident smile had long been shattered. Sufficient damages were given to Barron on grounds of not only defamation but also emotional disturbance. Although the money was irrelevant, it was a victory symbol for Barron. It proved that even in the midst of media, anyone needed at least basic human decency. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed as Barron stepped into the midday sun. Cameras flashed, microphones jostled for position, and questions flew from every direction. Barron's attorney addressed the press first, pointing out how this case meant everything to the principle of accountability in media. Then, to everyone's surprise, Barron himself stepped forward. "This case was never about silencing anyone," he began, his voice calm but resolute. "It's about accountability. We all have a responsibility to think about the impact of our words, especially when those words have the power to hurt. I hope this reminds everyone that respect should never be optional." The statement was brief, but it carried weight. Social media exploded with reactions, many praising Barron's courage and maturity. "Respect is never optional" soon turned into a viral hashtag with individuals from different walks of life coming forward and sharing their bullying stories and cases of mistreatment. The network was in shock, however. The trial brought the darker aspects of its work into public light, and leaked emails now found themselves in the center of attack. The show's sponsorships were canceled by advertisers, and its ratings took a nosedive. Under mounting pressure, the host issued a second, more heartfelt apology during a broadcast. "I crossed a line," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret, "and I've learned from this. To Barron Trump, I'm truly sorry." For Barron, the apology felt too little, too late, but it wasn't about him anymore. It was about the precedent the case had set. The network immediately released changes in the policy it used. The rules that govern content have been set up tighter and will create committees of oversight that ensure accountability is implemented for future mishaps. For weeks following the verdict, Barron took time out of the public eye and turned his focus on personal matters. But the experience didn't remain in the background. He went quietly to work with anti-bullying organizations, using his platform to stand up for those who didn't have the resources or visibility to fight back. Letters poured in from strangers across the country, parents thanking him for standing up, teens sharing their own experiences with bullying, and even former critics admitting they had changed their perspective. One letter from a teacher in rural Montana stood out to him. "Your courage gave my students a lesson no textbook ever could," it read. "Thank you for reminding us all that even small voices can make a big difference." The ripple effects of the lawsuit extended far beyond Barron's personal victory. It rekindled conversations on the role of media and the dynamics of power in public figures versus those who wield influence over them. More importantly, it reminded people of the value of empathy, even in a world that often seems to thrive on conflict. But for Barron, the greatest victory wasn't the courtroom decision or public recognition. It was realizing that he could make a difference not by following in someone else's footsteps, but by standing firm on his own. Barron's journey wasn't just a newsworthy lawsuit. It was the defining moment in his personal battle. For many, it became a symbol of resilience, proof that even the quietest voices could demand to be heard. The case had brought him into a spotlight he had long avoided, but instead of shrinking from it, he stood tall, turning the attention into a platform for change. In the weeks and months following the verdict, the impact of the case continued to resonate. Discussions in schools on cyberbullying and the impact of words were influenced by Barron's decision to stand up. Anti-bullying organizations reported increased donations, many attributing this to the publicity that the case gave their organizations. Conversations once theoretical on the line between free speech and accountability became personal and urgent for millions of people. Life gradually returned to a new normal for Barron as he enrolled in college, devoting himself to his studies while quietly continuing his advocacy. He kept a folder of letters and emails from people who reached out to thank him. The reminder of lives touched served to ground him every now and then as he read a few again. But the lessons of his experience extended far beyond the courtroom. He had learned that standing up for oneself wasn't just about protecting personal dignity. It was about setting an example for others. In taking on a media giant, he had shown that no one, no matter how powerful, was above accountability, and in the process, he had redefined what it meant to be a Trump, not through controversy or conflict, but through compassion and strength. The moral of the story was clear. Words matter. They have the power to hurt, to heal, to divide, and to bring people together. And while freedom of speech is a cornerstone for society, it comes with an equally important responsibility to use that freedom wisely and with empathy. As Barron reflected on his journey, one thought remained constant: the importance of taking a stand, even when the odds seem insurmountable. It's not about the size of the fight, he once said in an interview. It's about the reason behind it. If you're standing up for what's right, you've already won. And so, for all of those watching, it is clear that the challenge: what will you stand for? Will you make your voice heard to help make the world a kinder, more compassionate place? Maybe it's a voice against injustice, or a voice for the person who needs to hear someone say, "I'm here." If Barron's story has inspired you, let it be a call to action. Share this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that remind us of the strength and courage within us all. Because the fight for dignity and respect isn't just Barron's fight. It belongs to all of us. Together, we can ensure that the world becomes a place where kindness and accountability are never optional.